The former comedian who upended Ukrainian politics once before by becoming the country's president is set to do it again. Exit polls put Volodymyr Zelenskiy's Servant of the People party on course to win the biggest share of the votes in Ukraine's snap parliamentary election. Speaking after exit polls were released, Zelensky outlined the goals he hopes a convincing win will bring more easily within reach.
Our main priorities, and I repeat this for every Ukrainian, are to end the war, return our prisoners home, and defeat the corruption that persists in Ukraine.
The likely victory for his new party, named after the sitcom in which he played a president, is vital for Zelensky to consolidate his political power. After being elected president by a landslide in April, the political novice faced a parliament full of his opponents, threatening to thwart his pledge to implement radical reforms. Likely to come short of a majority, Zelensky will still need a coalition partner to form a government. The president said he has invited the Golos party, led by rock star Sviatoslav Vakarchuk, for coalition talks. Many Ukrainians welcomed the results of the exit polls, putting the president's party ahead at the expense of the old guard.
Only the servant of the people. I believe all others have already shown themselves. They have done everything they could for the Ukrainian people, and it's time for them to retire. I'm happy that the servant of the people got as much as they did, because I'm really inspired by what our president is doing right now. And I hope he will continue doing the same things, with the same pace and enthusiasm.
But even with a loyal parliament behind him, Zelensky faces a host of challenges in a country scarred by years of war with Russia-backed separatists. Whether Zelensky can overcome these problems or become just another in a long line of politicians either unwilling or unable to effect real change is a question that remains on the lips of many.
Let's find out more now with Gustav Gressel, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, focusing on Ukraine. Good morning, Gustav. Thanks so much for being with us. Zelensky wants to upend Ukraine's political system. He's a former comedian, but his party is composed of novices like himself. You know, how likely is real change ahead for Ukraine?
Well, it's going to be enormously tough. The first hurdle is getting a government together, and he will probably fall short of a majority. So we have half of the parliament that is sort of takes a seat now. The other half is still counted. That's the single-seat ticket. But he would need another 100 wins out of 199 to get the majority. If he makes a coalition, he has basically sort of the poisonous asset of the opposition platform, which would lead to street protests, whatever, and they actually don't have an agenda with together. And then he has two parties whom he has very much confronted during the election campaign, which is Tymoshenko's and Poroshenko's parties, respectively. So the party of the previous government he wants to distance himself from. And the reformer party around rockstar Vakarchuk has about 6%, so they probably won't tip the balance. So he's in a very tricky position. He will have to turn to one of his former enemies for a compromise. To
form some kind of coalition government. What are Ukrainian voters saying with his election? What do they want to see happen in the country?
So basically, it's about change and it's about corruption. That's the main issue. And those who voted for Zelensky, they don't trust the established parties to eradicate corruption, and for them, corruption is the main issue. The other thing is, and that is interesting, Zelensky was leading far more in the polls before, but in recent weeks, other topics like gas prices, energy prices, gas market liberalization, which would add additional burdens, came on the ticket again, and that's where Tymoshenko came back in. Her party was about to be dropped out of parliament because of few voters, and she rejoined with a very populist agenda, and it was popular, especially amongst the elderly. So you have both change, but also kind of insecurity about the future, resentment towards reforms, and that's what's driving the other parties.
Okay, so there were economic issues that dominated this election, and corruption, as you mentioned. Simmering, though, in the east of the country is the separatist movement in the Donbass. How does this factor in? And is Zelensky willing to give separatists more autonomy to end the fighting there?
Well, he has promised that he will do whatever in his power to end the war, and he made offers to give the separatists increased autonomy. The problem is Moscow, that controls these entities, wants authority over Kiev, and he's not willing to give them that. This means, at the end, Moscow will veto via these puppet regimes, veto any deal, and he's still in that predicament.
Okay, now the predicament is that he's tied to the Minsk Accords, Zelensky, or the nation is. Will he have independent talks with Moscow? Is he open for direct bilateral talks outside of the Minsk Accords?
No, he wants talks with Russia, but in a different setting. So in a company of British and American, at least diplomats, as they were signatory powers to the Budapest Memorandum. He will probably try to set an agenda that makes him independent from Poroshenko. But this agenda will not go so far as maneuvering himself into a way where he is at the mercy of Putin. On the other hand, we saw some sort of preliminary Minsk implementation steps on the front line, some bit of a de-escalatory measures. There might be more of this. Mm-hmm. He might secure sort of a slightly more calm front line. That's for the people who are fighting something. Okay. But we shouldn't expect big wonders and sort of big roles.
Gustav Gressel, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so very much for coming in.